of spectatorship theory, which is one of the special study areas for Component 1, Section B, and we're going to be, in this video, just having a look at the theory, really. I will stress that I'm recording this live. There's no script, so if there's any ums and ahs or gaps, just bear with us. Okay, so spectatorship will come up on your Component 1 exam for American films since 2005. Our chosen texts are Beasts of the Southern Wild and No Country for Old Men. Now, just a warning, I'm not going to talk about those films in this particular PowerPoint. This is just a view of the theory that we will then apply in lesson. So some of the former questions that have come up are on screen. How far do the films you have studied encourage different readings of the film? How far do your chosen films demonstrate a constant shift between passive and active spectatorship? And how far do your chosen films demonstrate the importance of visual and soundtrack cues in influencing spectator response? So as you can see, they're all about what defines our response as an individual to a film, but it could come from, it could focus on technical elements or more broad ideological or what we call macro elements such as narrative, genre and ideology. Okay, so what the exam board says is that a central part of film studies is how films address individual spectators to engage their interest and emotions. The module then is about responses to film and the explanation of how and why we respond to a film in the way that we do. So in the exam, your answer should be talking or more focused on the how and the why rather than what the response is. You name the response or identify the response first and then run through the factors that have generated that response or cause you to take a different response. So what we need to do first of all is show our understanding of the two following terms. So you're going to get a question pop up on screen. You need to answer those questions before you can carry on. Okay, so the audience, the assembled spectators at a public event, so basically it's a mass group, it's a mass response, where the spectator is the individual within the audience. So an audience will have a mass response, but the spectator has a much more individualized and much more focused response. And we're going to run through some of the factors that can create that now. So why would an audience respond differently? Well, spectators' response deals with the unique individual experiences of each audience member, and as a result, the responses are more complex and more difficult to articulate. So for example, if you watch a horror film in a theatre, chances are the audience will react in a very similar way to like jump scares and horrifying moments and monsters, but the individual reasons may be different. So the response could be quite similar, but the motivating factors behind that could be quite different. Okay, so what factors can contribute? So we have the textual elements. They are obviously the technical elements that are used to construct the film. They are camera, sound, mise-en-scène, edit and performance, narrative and genre. So we're not just dealing with technical elements on how individual scenes are constructed, but also the larger construction of the film itself via narrative and genre. And extra textual. This is information that is brought into the cinema, and that includes things like personal taste, our cultural backgrounds and experiences, our situated culture. And situated culture refers to, things like if you're sitting at home with your parents as opposed to in a cinema. Are you sitting watching a film in class with me over 2 days or watching it at home on your DVD? These things really can affect how we respond. And then the other extra textual information, the things that we're more concerned with are ideologies, age, gender, location, ethnicity, personal experience, level of education, knowledge of the filmmakers, stars, sequels, genre. So basically, your response is defined by what the film presents and what you bring into the cinema with you. Okay. So the other question at the start of the this video asked about active and passive audience or spectators. So I'm going to pause the video and you can try and write a definition and then the video will resume. Okay, passive audience members are unthinking spectators who, when watching the film, they do not question the message and they accept it. So it's the acceptance of another's opinion as their own. And the active response is we, as a spectator, interpret the text meaning by combining what we see with our own ideologies and personal experiences. So we have much more of an individualized response. So why would an active spectator respond differently than a passive spectator? Well, it's because of cultural backgrounds, our own experiences, the way we view a film. We basically interpret a film through a unique lens, through our own culture and background, etc. And they're all unique to each individual. Okay, a key part of spectatorship is this theory by Stuart Hall. It's called the Encode decode model, and what Hall suggests is that the audience decodes ideologies or messages and values that are encoded into the text by the producers. By producers, we mean filmmakers, writers, directors, actors. They implant a message in their film, and it's our job to decode it and either agree, disagree, or challenge it. So the three types of responses, according to Hall. The first one is preferred reading. The film is read in a way that the producers intend. The spectator will identify the encoded ideologies and agree with them. We have negotiated reading, which is in between preferred and oppositional. So in between the two, a spectator identifies and understands the preferred reading, but only partly, and they form their own opinion or reading of the film. And an oppositional reading, the spectator rejects the preferred reading and creates their own, usually the opposite of what is intended. The spectator will reject the ideologies presented. And generally speaking, relating back to our question, a passive audience member will have a preferred response with the active audience member because they are more consciously thinking about the film. Sometimes we'll have a negotiated or oppositional reading, or a combination of all three. Okay, so there's a series of brief explanations of how an audience member may respond to Beast of the Southern Wild. If you want to read that and sort of make some notes, you can pause the video, because if not, I'm just going to carry on. Okay, so let's have a think about this. What type of films are more likely to generate a preferred response? So we would identify Hollywood mainstream films. Now, there's going to be a series of questions. If you can answer them, and then the video will resume. Okay, Hollywood films generally generate a preferred response because they rely on familiar genre narrative conventions and devices. They employ non-controversial subject matter and aimed at a large audience. So by simplifying the message, the film is more likely to generate a preferred response. So in contrast to that, like Beast of the Southern Wild or independent film, that's more likely to generate more of an active response for the following reasons. These films attempt to break convention, employ new or alternative techniques, and can explore more complex and controversial subject matter. Part of the reason for this is that Hollywood blockbusters have a profit incentive, so they have to make money, a lot of money. So you're not going to make money by alienating your audience or providing them with something that they can't really understand, or something that provides a shocking ending or something like that can be sometimes off-putting. But independent films, they're not really about making money. It's not primarily what drives them. They're designed to make spectators think, and the independent film is where attitudes in society are generally challenged, not in mainstream films. So you're more likely to have a greater variety of responses to indie films as opposed to mainstream. So the question at the start of the lesson is about active and passive spectatorship. Now I'll give you the answer now. It's a combination of both. You're never completely passive because that implies that we don't think, which is impossible, and we're never completely active because that implies that the technical elements of film, the construction of the film, have no impact on the audience and the spectator, which we know is not true. So and with that in mind, there are three stages to spectatorship that we can explore very briefly. And if you can understand and apply these three stages or identify them in your three films, you'll be able to identify some of the reasons why a spectator may respond in a certain way. And those three stages are recognition, alignment, and allegiance. And as an audience member, or as a spectator rather, we're subjected to a narrative, and we have characters and use of camera and mise-en-scène and sounds, and the idea is that the filmmaker is trying to make us recognize a scenario, align with the character, and then share their experience and agree with it. But that is not always the case. So recognition. Recognition really is about creating a shared framework for the world the film sits in, so a shared framework with the director. So for example, if you look at this image, it's pretty straightforward what is being connoted by the use of mise-en-scène and camera and performance. You know, the use of red and black, the symbolism, it clearly draws from iconography of Nazism, fascism, dictatorship. And we in the audience will recognize that. So the director doesn't have to overtly tell us these are bad guys. Just through the use of mise-en-scène, we all have a shared understanding of red and black and the leather coats and the stance connotes evil rather than good. So there's an example of a shared experience. So if we watch the film that opened with this, we would recognize that they are villains without it having to be explicitly told to us. So what we've done is decoded the mise-en-scène, and we have identified the intended response and taken it because of our shared understanding of the world. Now, obviously, if the director comes from a different country or a different cultural background, and maybe the audience or the spectator doesn't have that shared connection, that could be a problem, and it could lead to an oppositional or negotiated response. Okay, now most films will attempt to identify the spectator with the protagonist of a film. Now, sometimes indie films don't have protagonists, which makes this difficult, so you might have an ensemble cast and it's more about aligning with an idea rather than a person. But generally, a film has a protagonist, and when we align with that character, or when we identify with that character, it's called alignment. And that's the process of identification with something or someone. And the spectator's individual emotional response to a film frequently depends on how we align ourselves with the protagonist. Now, I just want to point out at this point, it's too simplistic to look at, the images on screen, like Chris from Get Out, and say, oh, only, young black African-American men in particular would align with that character. The character goes through some quite extreme emotional states. He's an outsider. He's targeted for a specific reason. So people can identify and align with characters on multiple levels. For example, Rey, you don't have to be a female to align with the character. The ideology she embodies about morality and goodness and ethics and those type of things are what make us align. So for Beast of the Southern Wild, it's a film about a young African-American girl. She's 6 years old, experiencing the fallout of a catastrophic disaster. You don't have to go to New Orleans. You don't have to be female or African American, because we can connect on different levels. She's a very vulnerable character, and we've all been children, so we can all appreciate on some level the vulnerability of the character. And her relationship with Winker father. We've all had relationships of varying types with parents, or maybe absent parents, and those are the things that can drive our response. Okay, so once the spectator's aligned with the protagonist, it's possible to break that alignment if the character acts in a way that conflicts with the spectator's own morality. So for example, a character you align with, they are presented with a moral decision. So the example we'd be using lesson is in The Force Awakens, Rey, early on in the film, is given a question, a moral choice. Are you going to trade BB-8 for food? So that's quite a selfish motivation. If she chooses yes, then that tells us a lot about the character, and maybe it can break alignment. The fact that she gives away the food to protect the robot friend she just made shows us that she's morally good, and that makes us align with her more than the other decision. And what happens then is that over the course of the narrative, the more decisions the character makes that we agree with, and the more we align with the character, we become loyal to that character basically, and we give them allegiance. And the idea is that you as a spectator are connected emotionally, ideologically with the character, and it's harder to break that as the film goes on. So allegiance pertains to our moral evaluation of the characters, and it's another form of identification, but this time it goes a little bit deeper, and it can, be driven by a wide range of factors such as class, race, nation, age, ethnicity, social issues, gender. So coming back to a point I made a few minutes ago, a character like Chris in Get Out, or our character in Beast of the Southern Wild with Hush Puppy, you may empathise or identify and give allegiance to her because of her vulnerability, but young women watching the film may give more allegiance or find more ways to identify. So again, it depends on the individual, their experiences, how far we go with our alignments and our allegiance. So when it comes to active and passive spectatorship, we are constantly jumping back and forth between both states, really. So if you look at a film like Beast of the Southern Wild, my personal opinion, I'm not a fan of the film. I think it's a little bit exploitative maybe at times, and it's a little bit sugary. Saccharine is the word. It's too sugary, sweet for me. I think it masks some of the real problems going on. So I would identify and align with the character of Hush Puppy, and I identify what the message is, but I just find it a bit exploitative. So my response would be negotiated. So your job in your exam is to express that. So what we'll do with this lesson, this video, is that in our next lesson, we're going to pick 6 scenes, 3 from each film, and we're going to try and identify the moments we give recognition, allegiance, and alignment to the characters, and the factors that contribute to that, both technical and extra textual. Okay.